Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be checking out the Caddx Nebula Nano camera for the DJI digital FPV system. This is the production version of the Vista kit and this is the box that it comes in, and if you look closely there's a picture of another camera on the box, and when I asked Caddx if I should show it on camera they said yes, so make of that what you will. The Caddx Nebula is a replacement nano camera for the Caddx Vista or Air unit that uses a hobby standard size, which was a complaint of the first DJI camera because they are around 21mm across, whereas micro cameras are about 19mm and nano cameras are 14mm across. So you can buy the Caddx Nebula Nano on its own for $36.99 or with a Vista for $125. Now I've made a couple of videos on this already because Caddx very kindly provided me with some early details, but today I'm going to be doing a full review. So the Nebula Nano is a collaboration between Caddx and DJI, just like the Vista unit, and the camera on its own weighs 4.6 grams without a harness, which is about half the weight of the original DJI camera. And to put that in perspective, most analog nano cameras weigh around 3.9 grams, so they've done well here, especially as they are using a fully adjustable 2.1mm m8 lens. Now you might be thinking, why did they come out with the nano camera first rather than making the Vista unit smaller? And I agree with you there, but DJI usually do things for a reason. The Vista unit, including the Nebula, the harness and the antenna, weighs 26 grams, and with the original DJI camera it weighed 32 grams. So in the grand scheme of things, a saving of 5 or 6 grams doesn't sound like a lot. So it's only going to be beneficial to the toothpick style models at the moment. But when the Vista came along, that surprised everybody and no one was expecting it either. And I think it's fair to say that DJI are pretty invested in our sector of the hobby now. So I'd be very surprised if they stopped here. Anyways, just like the Analogue Nano variants, there are some limitations compared to a full-size or micro camera. For example, it can only be viewed with a 16:9 aspect ratio, and for now you can't change any settings such as colour, brightness, saturation, etc. Although I'm told that could change in the future. And if I've learned anything owning this DJI system, it's that they continuously improve it beyond my expectations. But for now, there is only one setting which sits between low latency and high quality mode, where the latency is around 29 to 35 milliseconds. And if you think that is too high, then you are completely spoiled because, as I've said in previous videos, it's about the same latency range as some of the popular analog CCD cameras still being used today. Yes, analog cameras have a variable latency as well, which is not something you often hear people talking about. You can still use focus mode, but I don't like to use it, so I won't be doing that in this review. The Nebula Nano also records a low resolution of 1280 by 720p if you connect it to the Air unit, but it does retain the same data rate of 40 megabit per second, which is very high for 720p, and it also records the same audio, although I imagine most people interested in this camera will more likely attach it to a Caddx Vista. But I'm not going to be doing that today because you only get to see the recording from the goggles DVR when the Vista is attached to it, and that only records at 20 megabit. But the feed being sent to the goggles is 25 megabit or above. So just like analog, what you actually see through the goggles is better than the DVR. So for the sake of science, I'm going to remove the DJI camera from my modified GapRC Signet 3 Pro, and then I'm going to pop a camera adapter over the Nebula because they didn't include the nano to micro adapter that you get if you buy the camera on its own, which I fed back to Caddx. And they also didn't provide any screws either. But hopefully the Air unit will capture a more accurate representation of what you see through the goggles with its higher data rate. It's going to be a pain though, because the camera attached to the air unit has a rubber grommet that is glued to the back of the DJI camera to stop any tension damaging the wire harness. So I'm going to have to unscrew the harness from the Vista and remove the industrial strength tape that I used to stick the air unit to my Signet Pro. Then I'll need to undo the hex screws at the front of the air unit to clip in the Nebula's harness from the underneath. Something to watch out for if you do end up taking the back of the Nebula off is that once you undo the screws, there is nothing stopping the front lens housing coming apart from the board, which exposes the sensor to dust, so be very careful when doing that. Anyways, every harness from the Vista, Nebula and Air unit are the same type of connector, so they are all interchangeable. You just have to make sure that your DJI devices are up to date through the FPV Assistant, because the latest release includes the support for the Nebula Nano camera. So first of all, I thought we should take a look at the original DJI camera. I'm flying in a 4:3 aspect ratio, but I've dynamically stretched the image in a video editor to 16:9. I've also upgraded the version of Betaflight on this model. Originally, it had version 3.57, and it flew nicely, but I wasn't sure if the Nebula camera would work with it, and also I wanted to be able to use my DJI controller eventually with this model. But when I upgraded it, I then had to spend around about an hour and a half trying to tune it, and I'm still not happy with it. I'm getting prop wash oscillations and mid-throttle oscillations. You might be able to hear some whilst I've gone up high here, but at least we'll be able to compare it to the Nebula camera. Do a big dive here as well, and you can hear some little twitches, and yeah, just not happy with the tune at all, so might go back to 3.57. Anyways, I'm going to show you some different lighting conditions. So we're in the shade there and then in the sun. I'm going to do the same with the Nebula Nano so you can see the difference. We have got great detail here, something I love with the DJI camera, that it is great with dynamic range. And this one is for my friend Andy, because he wanted to see how the DJI system dealt with snow when it came to pixelization and stuff. Now, I can't do snow, Andy, but we've got these seeds absolutely everywhere, so I thought I'd get the props, flinging them in the air, and I hope that's good enough for you. It looks fine to me on here, but perhaps YouTube will butcher the footage anyways, but I thought I'd give it a go for you. So this is the Caddx Nebula Nano camera, and you can instantly see a difference. First of all, the resolution is lower. It's recording 720p to the Air unit, whereas the DJI camera records 1440p or 1080p, so there is a drop in the resolution and clarity. And also the hue of the camera is slightly different. The grass has a more yellowy colour to it, whereas the DJI camera has a more deeper green. Now this is where it started to get interesting, because I'm going to go into the shadows here now, and there's no problem with it switching when it comes to dynamic range. But what is strange is that it seems like the lens is fogging up. Now of course it's not fogging up, but when I back off and we look at the sun here, it's definitely sort of an orb around the lens. But I'm now back into the field and out of the shadows, and things look better, so I think it might be just a trait of this camera. I've let Caddx know about it and they have acknowledged it. So I'm going to try and get all of the seeds lifting up again to see how much quality that picks up. But what I noticed is if we take a look at the houses and cars in the background, there is some detail being lost. You can't see the bricks very well, and you don't see much texture. Now I'm getting plenty of detail in the objects around me. You can see that we've got all of these seeds floating around, but again, kind of looks like the lens is fogged up when it hasn't. I think it's just a trait. Now it's fine for flying FPV, in fact it's great. The latency is just a little bit lower than the DJI camera as well. But if you're looking at it from a cinematic perspective, of course the original DJI camera wins hands down. Now, I didn't expect a nano camera to be as good as a micro camera or full-sized camera anyways, because it's the same in the analog world. Now, in the analog world, nano cameras have gotten much better, but they're still not quite as good as a micro camera in my opinion. Now, I've spoken to Caddx regarding my thoughts on this camera, and they say that they are working with DJI to improve it some more, because you can't change any settings. Everything you are looking at here is what you get, so they are looking to improve it. I'm also noticing some slight blurriness on the edges of the lens and some vignetting, but it's not too bad. This is where I think the camera is really great. You see how sunny it is, and then I go into the shadow. It's just like a click of a finger and it switches. So it's really good from an FPV perspective. In fact, the way I would describe it is that it kind of sits quality-wise between the original DJI camera and then the Shark Bite system that they're working on. I think the quality of the Nebula is better when you look at the footage online of the Shark Bite, but yeah, it sort of sits in that area, and I'd be happy for this to sit on a lightweight model like a toothpick or something like that, but they need to come out with a lighter Vista unit as well, I think. But what I'm going to do is leave you with the rest of this flight, and then I'm going to do some field of view comparisons. Next, let's take a look at the differences in field of view between the two cameras. This is a shot taken from the Nebula Nano, and this next one is from the original DJI camera in 16:9 mode on my Titan DC5. So it looks like the Nebula Nano has a slightly higher vertical field of view, but it's just because the Titan is slightly higher off the ground. In fact, if you look at the tree on the far left, the DJI camera has a slightly wider field of view than the Nebula Nano, but not by much. Then this last shot is from the DJI camera in 4:3 mode, but dynamically stretched in a video editor to 16:9. So the vertical field of view is larger, although I did notice that it's lost a tiny bit of horizontal field of view in 4:3 mode because the tree on the far left has disappeared and the quad didn't move when I was switching between the settings. Anyways, that is my review of the Caddx Nebula Nano. Let me know what you think in the comments. In its current condition, I'd say that its quality is better than the footage I've seen so far of the Shark Bite, but YouTube has a tendency to butcher all footage, so I'll be uploading this in 4K to try and get the best out of it. But it doesn't perform as well as the original DJI camera. I think it could seriously improve the picture quality of a toothpick style model, digital, and if DJI came out with a nano video transmitter, this camera would be a real winner. I'll put links in the video description as well as a pinned comment if you wish to get one, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.